Okay, Hotel family, my name is Brother Ray. We'd like to welcome everyone to the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club. We meet here every other Wednesday in honor of William Mackey Jr., Louis Ray Rivera, Amos Wilson, Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, Alton Maddox, Professor George Simmons, Brother Assad, and all the historians who gave up fame and fortune to burn the midnight oil to bring history to the people. We never want to forget them, so we meet in their honor. So I'm going to bring the camera over to the Amos collection. These books is to help survival in African world info systems. We have Amos's classic, Blueprint for Black Power, Black on Black Violence, The Psychology of Self-Hatred and Self-Defeat Toward a Reclamation of the African Mind, African-Centered Consciousness versus the New World Order, Issues of Manhood in Black and White, The Falsification of African Consciousness, and then we have S.K. Damiani's Distorted Truths and the Bastardization of African Cosmology. These books we have to help survival in African world info systems continue the work of Amos Wilson. So we never want to forget Professor Amos and all the work that survival does to keep that history going. Now, I'm going to bring some books for the listening audience you could get. Well, I don't know, Amazon's supposed to have this union strike on, so I don't know if you order, you might get it, but you have Goodwill books, you got A books, you got Barnes and Noble. So Amazon is not the only game in town. In honor, I never want to forget our good friend, Louis Ray Rivera. And Louis Ray Rivera, who took up the mantle when Professor Amos, when Mackey left us. Louis Ray Rivera would come and speak, and he would speak for hours. And we would walk him home, and he lived only 2 blocks away, and he talked for another hour and a half. So this book is in honor of Louis Ray. Also, the other couple of publications I have in honor of Dr. Randy Short, we have Slavery Mastery, The Impact of Religious Slavery Revealed. Also, we have Thanks from Trust and African Echoes, Max Dumas, Jews, God, and History. And this book tells you about a lot of events that went on, and a lot of these events didn't even happen. So I want to thank Trust and Brother Harold. Also, we have When China Sneezes, Cynthia McKinney, When China Sneezes from the Coronavirus Lockdown. Everybody was talking about Kamala Harris, but Cynthia McKinney, when she ran for president, she did not get the support. She did not get the support. And she was from Georgia, and they ran her out of Georgia. So this book was in honor of Cynthia McKinney. Also, when Donald Trump made the statement, how the U.S. creates shithole countries, this is another book that you could get, and is edited by Cynthia McKinney. So this is another publication that's excellent, where you do your reading and your research and you find out. Everything from medical marijuana to the legalization, they're trying to legalize. As Brother Darren says, they're trying to start these open shooting galleries where you can shoot up all you want and ain't nobody gonna stop you. Reefer spots all over the place. Well, this book, Dope Incorporated, tells you about the legalization of marijuana. So we have this book. You can get it from A Books, Thrift Books, and get this book and do your reading. Now, another book I picked up, African Slavery in Latin America and the Caribbean. That's a topic that, you know, they talk about, but it's not talked about as much as slavery in the United States. So it did happen in them countries. African slavery in Latin America and the Caribbean. It's got to be talked about. In honor of the irritated genie, War on the Horizon, Nayo Kamati, we have his two books, Jews Are the Problem and Jews Are the Problem Too, The Psychology of the Jew. These books is in honor of Nayo Kamati, the irritated genie, and we have these here for the people. So first of all, I want to make sure that the people give yourself a big hand that came out in this cold to support us after being off, and we start the new year. I have three books that you have to get, and the first one is The Shadow Party, How George Soros and Hillary Clinton, the 60s radicals, took control of the Democratic Party. Excellent publication. You can read it in a matter of weeks. And this is a blockbuster book, The Man Behind the Curtain, by Matt Palermo, Inside the Secret Network of George Soros. This is another book. And then this is a blockbuster, Soros, the Unauthorized Biography, The Life, Times, and Trading Secrets of the World's Greatest Investor. So when you get this book, you will see what's going on with this George Soros and how he's just disrupted Eastern Europe and the world. And there's much more books on Soros. And his son, heir apparent, is getting ready to take over. Now, everybody thinks the 19 is over, but the 19 is not over. We have Capitalism on the Ventilator, the impact of CO-19 in China and the US, The Real Anthony Fauci, Robert Kennedy, thank you. Also, The Truth About CO-19, another book by Dr. McCullough. Our great friend, Dr. Scott Whitaker, in his book Medicine, M-E-D-I-S-I-N, The Causes and Solution to Disease and Malnutrition and the Medical Sins That Are Killing the World, Dr. Scott Whitaker. Also, Without Sanctuary, this book documents the hangings, the killings of what happened, how they just hung us in the South, the postcards, the people. So when you hear about all these reparation committees, and that's the new thing out, reparations and all this nonsense, it's a George Soros creation. But this book, they don't have this book where they want to do another study. Because you don't have to do another study. Once you see this book, you don't have to do another study. They'll never do another study for everybody else. Robert Kennedy, the Wuhan cover-up. Another excellent publication. Another book by Robert Kennedy in the Children's Health Defense, Down the CO-19 Rabbit Hole, Independent Scientists. This is another excellent publication. So you got a lot of reading. Vax versus unvaxxed, Let the Science Speak. Another Children's Health Defense. And I picked this up, thank you Kennedy, and he's in with Trump, so I hope he makes a difference. The Medical Pharmaceutical Killing Machine, Finding Facts That Could Save Your Life. This is another publication on Children's Health Defense. Senator Rand Paul, Deception, the Great CO Cover-Up. And this is Senator Rand Paul. Now this book right here, every time you turn around, a youth is catching a heart attack, a blood clot, dementia, turbo cancers, and all these youth that was relatively healthy. Edward Down did an excellent publication, and it shows the pictures. And every time you open up the paper, you see something where somebody is passing away. Now, this is a blockbuster book. You can get it off Amazon. Edited by Naomi Wolf. And Pfizer wanted to withhold this information for 75 years. And under the Freedom of Information Act, they went and forced them to come up with the information. It's called the Pfizer Papers. In April, they're going to come out with another book called the Moderna Papers, where you'll be able to get information that they didn't want to give to the public. So we want to thank Children's Health Defense and Kennedy. So I'm going to name some community events. And we had this information because we have our own Dr. Lewis that gave us this stuff way before. One of the hottest shows on the East Coast, Thorough Black Talk with Tad, Keisha, Ashe, Sister Mama, a.k.a. Sister Marcia, Brother Blacksmith, and they also have another dynamite sister that comes on that program. And Keisha, what's her name? Well, Keisha, give me her name. But this show comes on Facebook Live every Thursday at 8 o'clock. Our Philadelphia Connection with Sister Empress Chi, Brother Lumumba, and Millions Women's March. Blog Talk Radio out of Philly comes on every Saturday at 10:30, and that number is 1-319-527-6189, and you can tune in on the information and actually get in on the program. So we want to thank Sister Empress. Every Monday, Io Kamate on Sankofa Revolutionary Radio from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock, WSYP 95.1 FM out of Birmingham, Alabama. Brother Anthony Mohammed. So one of the programs that come on is Io Kamate, but they got a health program that comes on with Brother Haru. That program is from 10 to 11, and that's an excellent program. So that's Sankofa Revolutionary Radio, and it comes on live. But Io Kamate comes on Monday. He talks about the books and what's going on. So we want to thank this program. Also, our Baltimore Connection. Brother Darren Muhammad, State of the City, comes on sometime Wednesday, Thursday, and he's coming in 2025 Power Pack information. But every Saturday, State of the City, Brother Darren Muhammad on Facebook Live, Instagram, and Spreaker. Excellent programs. So we want to salute Brother Darren. Now another Power Pack program, Dr. Aline, Your Immunity Project. That comes on at 3 o'clock live on Dr. Aline, Your Immunity Project, but they do a repeat. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they do a repeat 7 o'clock at night every Tuesday. Your Immunity Program with Dr. Aleem. Just Google Dr. Aleem and he got an excellent program. And also he comes on Sankofa Revolutionary Radio and Calfani Radio. Our brother Trust Graham and African Echoes. The Trust Graham Study Group, they're doing the psychology of self-hatred and self-defeat toward the reclamation of the African mind. That's African Echoes. That comes on Friday at 8 o'clock. You can tune in with Trust in them. And also they give you a double header. They come in on Saturday and they're doing Destruction of Black Civilization with Chancellor Williams. So that's another publication. The Simotep Family with Dr. James McIntosh, Sister Richard Dean Theodore, that comes on every Tuesday at 10 o'clock on WBAI Minefield. So we have to give Dr. Mac support in his fight against Netflix and that disgusting Sigma on Good Times. So Dr. McIntosh, Minefield, 99.5 WBAI. In the programs that Simotep is that's bringing, we don't want to forget him. So ladies and gentlemen, those are community events and information that comes on. Dr. Fred, you there? Monderson. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, in honor of Dr. Ben, Dr. Ben did this book, Black Man of the Nile and His Family. And not too many computers was out when Dr. Ben did this book. Excellent publication where he goes into the history of Kemet, the dynasties and everything. Dr. Ben went beyond the call of duty. And in honor of him, may he rest in peace. And I remember just seeing him up at Pam Pam's restaurant and listening to him, and great historian and scholar. So ladies and gentlemen, this Wednesday, we're gonna honor and tribute with Dr. Ben by Dr. Fred Monderson, who just got back and he called me and he said, Ray, I gotta do a tribute to Dr. Ben, to keep his name alive and keep the history that Dr. Ben did, and he told it like it is. So, give a great big hand to our keynote speaker, who's just back, Dr. Fred Monderson.
Hey! Hold that.
Ashe. Thank you.
Brothers and sisters, good evening and Hotep. With permission from the elders, I will speak.
You have permission. I have permission. I only been Dr. Lewis.
Hotep.
Hotep.
This is a tribute to Dr. Joseph Alfredo Antonio Ben Johanna. I stopped counting but it's either 13th or 14th, which was essentially interrupted in 2019 by the pandemic. Now, thanks to Brother Ray, I am pleased to continue this undertaking. To recall, in my first book, actually there were three, which I call my trilogy to Dr. Ben, not Dr. Ben's trilogy, okay, which is Africa, Mother of Western Civilization, African Origins of the Major Western Religions, and Black Man of the Nile and His Family. There are letters where Dr. Ben permitted me in writing to hold tributes such as this one and issue call for papers in his name and in Dr. Clark's name. This honor was never extended to anyone else. My three monograms are celebrating Dr. Ben Johannan, in which many of his letters are here. My daughter. Black History Extravaganza, honoring Dr. Ben Johannan. And Let's Liberate the Temple. This presentation is essentially a synopsis of the latter, Let's Liberate the Temple, though the synopsis has material not contained in the original document. Now, Dr. Ben's trilogy is Africa, Mother of Western Civilization.
Let me get it, hold on, let me get it. Okay, got it.
African Origins of the Major Western Religions. And a new issue of Black Man of the Nile that's published by Black Classics Press. The difference between these three books which I show you are reprints. I know where the originals are because I was one of the foot soldiers along with Dr. Lewis when we were supporting Dr. Ben as he was writing and publishing. So the man I know as friend and brother, Dr. Ben, was an unrelenting and uncompromising defender of Mother Africa, her children and things African. So too was his associate, Brother George Simmons. Dr. Ben was very resolute in his research efforts and so produced volumes of erudite scholarship with copious references that has stood the test of time and been very instrumental, influential to young researchers searching for truth and leading the way in exposing such truth. As such, every Black Studies program in America today, every department owes a debt of gratitude to Dr. Ben. For he advocated for them and took the heat off of them. In his books, such as I just mentioned, Africa, Mother of Western Civilization. Dr. Ben took to task racist European and European American Jewish theologians and practitioners of essentially the three major Western religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Liberal whites who write with a vengeance of distorting the African history with in false interpretation and narrative, spewing racist and bigoted tropes about Africa and Africans, their culture, their religion, etc. The personality. He even called to question fifth wheel blacks. You know, fifth wheel blacks, the Spears, who had become dependent on philanthropic patronage and so compromised their integrity as Africans, never even realizing they patterned others' narratives in keeping with Africans or blacks in line and falling manufactured false narratives that malign the very people they represent and supposedly lead. Dr. Ben challenged racist Western writers and their liberal companions, their counterparts, who wrote disparagingly and degradingly about Africa and African people. He pointed out that many people of Europe, though different, have, in many respects, have proper names as British, German, French, Italians, Greeks, Jews, Israelis, and so on. However, the Africans get described as Bantu, Negro, African south of the Sahara, the Pygmies, colors, niggers, and on, disrespectfully. And more important, many of these names don't have capitals. Capital letters, of course. He particularly pointed to their degradation of Africa, the distortion in their literature, not to forget omissions as to what he called cultural genocide in their racism and religious bigotry, particularly in the educational system. In such terms as Hamites and Semites and Caucasians and Caucasoids, etc. Terms that were not recognized and used by classical scholars who lived in the time of Africa's ancient glory, and they pray and the praises that they heap on these Africans, especially on Nile Valley occupants, whom Herodotus has described as having thick lips, broad noses, and are burnt of skin, meaning they were black. Much of the current distortion, the degradation, the dehumanizing of the African personality represents modern European American, even their Jewish racist narratives designed to remove from and deny the black man of his ancient heritage. In one instance, Dr. Jacob Karanis of Chicago reminded that Hegel took Africans out of Egypt and then he took Egypt out of Africa. However, much of this is not done more than 200 years ago. Dr. Ben said 400. I'm not talking to you, I'm not asking that you do the research. I did the research. So I'm here, and you gotta be careful about the people who come to speak to you and tell you, well, you do the research. They know you're not gonna do the research, so whatever they say, stand. You know, I was right here in Brooklyn, New York. One of the borough presidents said to take your husband to the doctor. And one group said, you can't say that. So he said, take him out to the doctor. And this lady had this husband, all he did was sit on the couch and watch TV. And she couldn't get him to go to the doctor, so she hired some movers who moved the couch, took the couch to the doctor with him sitting in it. So these guys know that you're not going to do the research. Look at all the books that Ray Ray just showed you. I don't see any of you running out there. I'm sorry to say. You're not running out there buying those books. I know you ain't buying my books, but I'm right there for your children and your grandchildren. I want you to know, I follow Tiger Woods' dictum. My score is on the board, matching. So my job is to put my work up there. It will stand the test of time. We must remember or be informed, up until the start of the 19th century, most books on Western civilization began with a chapter on Greece and Rome. Today, as modern research, archaeology and anthropology, etc., have revealed the enormous and enlightening glory of ancient African man along the valley of the Nile River Valley, and the influence they've had on all subsequent civilizations. The insidious modern writers and their equally dishonest and vicious counterparts have hijacked Egypt by using again such terms as Hamite, Semite. None of this existed. These are modern interpretations, modern colloquialism. Dr. Ben again reminded, all the Europeans are Europeans, but the Africans are Negroes, oftentimes without a capital letter in front of their names. Bantu, Pygmies, colored niggers. Dr. Asante reminded of the viciousness of the American whites who lynched President Obama. You want to know what happened to Obama? Look, book number 2. Barack Obama, master of Washington, D.C. It's all in here. As his administration unfolded, I chronicled everything and I addressed each issue raised, especially by the Republicans, the Party of No, Joe the Plumber, etc., etc. Barack Obama, master of and commander-in-chief. Obama, the journey completed, never promised a rose garden. This is what they do to our leaders when they represent us, as they did to Dr. Ben. So, Assange reminds us, there are no white people in Europe. They're British, German, Italian, French, Spanish, etc. Only in America you have white people. That it gives the poorest white person the privilege of thinking of himself better than the most professional, distinguished black person. Whether he's a doctor, a lawyer, a politician, a judge, a minister, it doesn't really matter. So let us also not forget the thievery of African real estate and its mineral resources. But this is for his uncompromising stance on the proper recognition and recording of African history. I have always pointed out, Dr. Ben took enemy fire, friendly fire, even family fire. The same applies to, again, Barack Obama. And let's face it, Kamala Harris, okay? I mean, you know, we know the trope that was written to be parroted by blacks. She ain't black. I know that Dr. Lewis is here, but I don't know if you can remember. I know that we all getting older and all that. But back in 1991, when Dr. Lewis held a dinner at the mini sink in Harlem in honor of Dr. Ben so that he would do his research on Elephantine Island in Aswan, Egypt, a Dravidian doctor came to us and he told us, he says, look, I'm from India. We catch hell in India because we are black. There's a black belt across the equator that all those people living in there are black. So much so Dr. Ben went and wrote, they all look alike.
Hold up.
They all look alike.
Let me get it.
Okay? They all look alike. So you get some guy here who's parroting somebody else's stroke. I mean, I took issue with Madam Wardrobe Malfunction, who said, oh, she ain't black. I heard her father was white. I went to the New York Times and did the research. The man was a well-respected black gentleman in court and tie. Okay? Black. So we gotta be careful about the things we say, where we get our information from, if we don't do the research. Okay? And in addition to the other books about Dr. Ben's trilogy, there was Abu Simbel. We were in Egypt with Dr. Ben, Dr. Lewis and I in 1989 when Dr. Ben published this book. I actually bought the book in Egypt from Dr. Ben because he had just finished it and took a few copies over there, and most of us tried to grab as much. And it's interesting because I didn't get him to. Most of the books that Dr. Ben wrote, I bought in first edition because we were trying to help him to turn over and do his work. So he says in his autograph of this book to me, he said, respect and admiration to Fred Monderson from Yosef Ben Yohanan, Old Catterick Hotel, Aswan, Egypt, Northern Africa, 1990. So he autographed this book for me in 1990. And if you look at this one that I wrote called Honor and Celebrating Dr. Ben Yohanan, practically every book that he wrote, he autographed for me. And in fact, here we are. Dr. Lewis is in this picture, and that brother that's going to come on in February to speak to you, I can't remember his name, he's in there, Dr. Jeffries and so forth. And here I am sitting at the feet of Dr. Lewis, Dr. Ben, and Professor Simmons. I took this book to Dr. Ben when he was in the nursing home, right? And I showed him what I was doing, and he appreciated it. And he autographed. This is the cover and the overleaf of the title page. Most of the books that I have, whenever I can get it, I got him to autograph my work. So, as I stand here in defense of the old master, I am proud to say that Dr. Ben was a friend of mine, and I'm continuing the work that he asked me to do. So, in regards to this presentation, which is, he asked that we liberate the Egyptian temple. And this is what I intend to do. Theophile Benga, Dr. Chikanta Diop's research associate in his book, African Philosophy, the Pharaonic Period, 2780 to 330 BC. It was published in 2004. He writes regarding Egyptian, Nubian, African experiment along the entire Nile Valley, or as Dr. Ben called it, African high culture. He says, one Egyptologist sums up this reality concisely. Egyptian society embraces the entire universe. All elements and beings are registered participants, like parts of a single whole, collaboration in a single enterprise. What he means is that the ancient Egyptians, however, the human being was put in ancient Egypt, however, the human being was precisely God, human God, a seamless whole in effect. That a philosophy of wholeness should take form in the Pharaonic polis was altogether natural, for a Pharaonic society was a grand, organized, universal ensemble embracing the elements of sky, sun, moon, stars, fire, water, earth, vegetation. Beings, gods, goddesses, spirits, kings and queens, vizier, the royal family. Administrators of various central, provincial, and local government departments, such as treasury, justice, army, temples, scribes, and sundry craft persons. We have carpenters, engravers, smelters, cobblers, together with peasants and herders, and ensemble held for nearly 2,500 years of registered sacred history. In this system, nothing was completely independent, isolated from the overall Pharaonic domain. This is what he's trying to say, that we as a people need to be like this, a symphony in harmony. The sacred and the profane were merely two aspects of a single socio-political reality incarnated by the Pharaoh, the God King. And so, the people look to their king as their representative to intercede with the gods to create and maintain social harmony and a fruitful society. So, given the principal function of the temple was to provide a safe and secure home for the god to be comfortable in his descent from the heavens. This security, whether it's physical, spiritual, metaphysical, was provided by the king, and in order to combat unending and continuous threats of Egypt's enemies, foreign, domestic, that were spiritually and psychologically malevolent, evil, continuous ritual and worship by the god's servants, who were priests, became necessary to aid the gods in the fight against this evil that was represented. The law of opposites operated, however, wherever in Egypt, such as night and day, desert and fertility, good and evil, or mad and instant, rich plain and the dreaded desert, south and north, upper and lower domains, sickness and health, ignorance and intellectual endeavors, land of the living and land of the dead, the East Bank and the West Bank and so forth. So the law of opposites operated, and it was a creation of Africans along the Nile, from the headwaters of the Nile in Uganda to the Mediterranean Sea. So, this brings us to the Egyptian temple. As such, the Egyptian temple was an essential component of the pharaonic kingship system. First, Theophilo Benga argued that divine manifestation stepped out of a parallel universe into this universe and finding water as uncreated matter, instantly began the process of creation, bringing into existence the worlds that would become comprised of 4 kingdoms: mineral, plant, animal, and human. Then, divine forces added a part of their cosmic essence, cosmic esoteric element, resulting in a 5th kingdom. So we have 5 kingdoms. We have the mineral, the animal, the plant, the human, and the God kingdom. Let me first identify what I call temples of many gods. Okay, you may say, well, the Egyptians had many gods. Not really. As Dr. Carruthers pointed out, these were not competing elements. They were simply disparate elements seen through different lenses. But they believed in the one universe, the supreme being. Let me first identify what I call temples of many gods. Okay, so we have Champollion, who cracked the code of hieroglyphics, had coined the term Trinity, comprised of the divine Father, the Mother, and the Son. And in the case of Karnak, he identified Amun as sun god, his wife Mut as earth goddess, and their son Kansu as moon god. Therefore, temples were inhabited by divine forces called gods or nectars or principles or spirits, etc. Let us first of all note that they were local gods, they were cosmic gods, they were personification of gods, universal gods, and even minor gods. What I mean by cosmic gods is, what's in the sky, whether it is the stars, the earth, even the river. These were things that these Africans realized that was outside of their being. They had no control over. They were powerful forces that influenced what they did. So, a number of the temples. The Ennead comprised a Karnak temple. Karnak temple, Dr. Ben reminded, Dr. Ben was a master of Karnak. Professor Simmons, George Simmons, he was a master of Karnak. We interacted with Brother Abdul, he was a master of Karnak. I have one book on Karnak temple, and I've done a 12-part series that's on YouTube somewhere if I can find it, on Karnak temple. So in some respects, I'm master of Karnak. I've been there nearly 24 times. I had the audacity to say to Mr. Helmy, I know the director of the temple, I know more about this temple than you do because I've been all over the temple. Every bit of piece of stone, I have a photograph of. So at Karnak temple, the Ennead, not the Ennead is sometimes this is a conglomeration of divinities, or gods, if you will. And don't be dissuaded in any way with the term God. It's just higher being, whether it's spiritual, metaphysical, or whatever, that is above human experience. So there were 15 at Karnak temple in the Ennead. So we have Amun-Ra. He was of the southern arc. That also there's a connection between Karnak and Luxor temples. Okay, I was explaining to Dr. Lewis earlier that very few people have done a book on Karnak temple. Chwala the Lubis had done one. I am coming out with a book on Luxor temple, and there's much more significance to Luxor Temple than is generally revealed, because they keep you on a need-to-know basis. Now, you don't need to know this, so it's hidden, or as I call it, esoteric. So we have Amun, his wife Mut, which is the Lady of Heaven, Mistress of the World, Kansu, their son, Min, the god of procreative powers, Isis, Thoth, Ma'at, Hathor, Osiris, Kentimati, Horus of the two horizons. You know, there were two Horuses. There was an elder Horus, who was an older brother of Osiris, and then there was Horus, who was the son of Osiris and Isis. Anubis and Nephthys. There were different centers of religious practice headed by a particular divinity. For example, Heliopolis, thank you very much. Heliopolis. Dr. Diab pointed out that Bishop Emile Amelino, he was criticized by Petrie especially for his quote-unquote grab of antiquities to sell in Paris. But among the other things that he did a lot of contradictory work to the established misrepresentation. But he pointed out that Heliopolis, as well as Erment, and several other cities were founded by the Anu, who were the blacks who sailed down the river. The Europeans like to tell us that Egyptian culture ascended the river, and therefore we need to see it from a north-south as well as a south-north perspective. Remember that, we often remember north, south, east, and west. It's not really that way. North-south is the orientation coming along the Mesopotamian Tigris-Euphrates River Valley system, which is European. But for the African, it is south-north. This is the flow of the river from Central Africa all the way down to the Mediterranean. And in so many other ways, the information has been distorted, and a lot of it has been omitted, and a lot of it has been prejudiced by religious and secular racism, so that the African will feel that his history began with roots. I mean, 1976 TV series, if you remember. So, Heliopolis, where Ra worship predominated. Now, in the creation mythology, it is said that Ra, who is also called Atum, thank you.
Tell me what you need.
Some water. Ra ruled in Africa. Well, you do the research. Hear what I mean by that. Not to go out there, listen to me. When Ra had finished creating the world, he made the Nubian people, the black people, right? Now, if we say that God made man in his own image, and the first people that he made was the Nubians before he made the Egyptians, tell me, what did God look like? And where did he come from? In Central Africa? In the Black Belt? So God, Ra, he stepped out, as Obama said, out of a parallel universe into this universe, and finding water begin the creation process. Thank you very much. Right? Some said that he masturbated or he spit out 4 gods, or actually 2. Shu and Tefnut, which was air and moisture, and this pair created 2 more, which was Geb and Nut, earth and sky. Geb and Nut created 4 kids, Isis and Nephthys, Osiris and Isis, Set and Nephthys. which meant that there were 8 of them, and he made 9 as the Heliopolis Enid. At Hermopolis, Thought was the principal god. All right? He laughed 8 times. Ha ha! Ha ha! Ha ha! Ha ha! And 8 divinities appeared. All right? So he had Noon and Noonet, which was water and Noon and Noonet, Het and Haket, Ket and Koket, and Amun and Amunet. And Amun and Amunet represent hiddenness. Yeah, right. So those 8 and him thought 9 represented the Enid at Hermopolis. I was there, very few people go there. The temple, his temple has been raised, but 2 enormous size apes still remain at the forefront of where the temple would be. It is called today Ashmunen, but in ancient times it was where Thoth's temple was located at what was called Hermopolis. Abydos had 7 divinities. It was Abydos, the existing temple. Let's put it this way. Abydos, as Amelinio had pointed out, and again some of the hidden information. Remember now, we can get to the discovery with the creation of the Aswan Haidar. He said that Petrie discovered at Abydos a city that was 14,500 years old. And this type of time framework is not out of the ordinary, because I think it was 1982, the magazine Science indicated that there was, okay, so we're told that farming began in Southwest Asia around 8000 BC, and it spread to Africa, it spread to Egypt in 4500 BC, and from thenceforth it climbed the Nile from north to south. I mean, tried to navigate against the river. And even though some people are said, some of these migrants are said to be boat people, try to steer your boat against the gushing water of the Nile. At Nabta Playa is in the western desert of southern Upper Egypt. There's southern Egypt and there's southern Upper Egypt. That's much closer to Nubia, to the west of Abu Simba. They discovered that these people were the first scientists. I asked my daughter the other day, who's the first scientist? She couldn't tell me. I had to tell her Imhotep. But even before Imhotep, these people of Nabta Playa, the western desert of Egypt, they were the first. Scientists. They mapped the heavens and so forth and so on. Right? So Abydos was in existence for little. Petrie discovered 10 levels of temples at Abydos dating back to the beginning of Egyptian civilization, which is 3100 BC. Excuse me. In the 19th dynasty, Seti I, who was the son of Ramses I and the father of Ramses II, he built the temple of Abydos, one of the most fascinating structures still in existence, with the best form of art still evident. There were 7 divinities practiced or worship in that temple. Okay, we have what is called the Osiris triad. Osiris, Isis, and their son Horus. And the 3 great gods of the empire, the 18th dynasty, 19th, 20th dynasty. Seti is of the 19th dynasty. We have Ra-Harati, Amun-Ra, and Ptah. That's 6. And Seti himself, he deified himself as a god, so he became the 7th god in this city. Deir el-Bahari, where Queen Hatshepsut had her architect construct her mortuary temple. Amun-Ra was worshipped there. Amun-Ra was a fusion of Amun and Ra. Amun was a slickster, to use that the Ben's term. He co-opted the powers of Ra and the powers of men, so he became the greatest of the gods. Okay, so he was worshipped at Hatshepsut's temple, and there's a second enclavement where Ra was worshipped in the temple. So he had his own court, and the only surviving altar in sight or in situ is situated atop of 7 stairs where the priest would climb in order to effectuate the ritual. But in addition to Amun-Ra, who was the king of the gods of the 18th dynasty, and Ra, Hatshepsut was worshipped because that was her temple. But her father also, Thutmose I, was worshipped there. And her brother, her antithesis, Thutmose III, he was also worshipped. So these were different deities. That temple also had a shrine to Hathor and another shrine to Anubis. So this is one of those temples of many gods. Abu Simbel was built by Ramses II. He is the son of Seti, and that's 19th dynasty. And he was married to this Nubian woman named Nefertari. Now, there's always been some kind of confusion with Ames Nefertari, Nefertiti, and Nefertari. The kings, even queens, had the habit, for use of a better word, of using or being named after great ancestors or ancestresses. So, if we go back to the 17th dynasty that expelled the Hyksos Asiatics, Ahmose, it was Seqenenra, his son Kamose, and their son Ahmose, he finally expelled the Hyksos conquerors after a 50-year war of attrition. He married his sister. His sister was Nefertari, and she carried her husband's name, Ames Nefertari. Flinders Petrie says that she was the most venerated woman in all of Egyptian history. And guess what? She's pictured, she's on my card. I don't know if I'd ever shown you guys, this is my card. Black goddess. And her son, he was also made a god because the two of them with their own temple in the western regions of Thebes, Luxor, they were considered to be the divinities to intercede on the behalf of a divine or a deceased person. And in that same vicinity, especially in the Deir el-Bahari vicinity, and I wanted to bring this in regarding one of our heroes here. When the deceased made this transition, he entered into a cavern in the Deir el-Bahari area to begin the journey to the afterlife judgment called the psychostasia. He went in the cavern over there. On the way to the cavern, on the way to the hall of judgment, the tree goddess poured 4 pitchers of water on him because he's crossing the desert. When he arrived at the location of the hall of judgment, there were 20 pylons or gates preceding the actual hall. And each was guarded by a demon, a spirit or whatever. And his job was to prevent you from getting inside the building. And you had to know his name and what he stood for. And then you say, okay, pass on. So after 20 of those stops, navigating the pylon, which is the entranceway into the temple, he arrived at the Hall of Judgment. And once in the hall, he was introduced now to the drama by whether it's Horus or Anubis. And then his heart is weighed against a fellow to see if he had lived by the tenets of Mart and so forth. And then you have, there is Anubis and the eater of the dead, and Horus, Anubis, and Thoth making the recordings. And what we see from the papyrus of Ani is that this gentleman was declared true of voice. He had lived according to the tenets of Mart, which is true justice, righteousness. And then he was introduced to Osiris, seated on his throne with the two Marti goddesses at his rear, in the back over there. And he could see everything that was transpiring in front of him. You see, what we need to understand is that in American parlance, Obama made that journey, and he sat there. He knows, as they say, he knows where all the bones are buried in each room. This is why he is feared. We are told differently that he is a demon. No, he's not. He's a defender of us. He's one of the people who is keeping the flies away from us. You know, in 1998, when I was chairman of the Bones Committee with Son Carson, right? And we sent the bones of Samuel Carson back to Ghana, West Africa. First time an African had returned. And Jerry Rawlins was the general, was the president of Ghana. And he said to Sonny, he says, you Americans in America is Africa's Trojan horse. And someone pointed out to me the other day, the reason that they haven't moved Africa is because we are over here. Okay. This brings me to the point I wanted to make about, I said it, about the Dravidian doctor who told us at Dr. Lewis's function, don't forget us, because we all look alike. Okay? And don't be dissuaded or don't be distracted by tropes that are planted. Okay, so Abu Simbel had 4 gods. Abu Simbel was a temple that Ramses II built in Nubia for his wife. There's a double temple, one for himself, one for his wife, Nefertari. So we have Ames Nefertari. Nefertiti is the one who came, it is set in Syrian, but some research has shown that she may have been Nubian herself. But she is projected as being a white lady who came, the son of Tajukipa, the daughter of Tajukipa, who came from Syria to marry Amenhotep III, but he was so old, his wife, Queen Tise, marry my son, Amenhotep IV, first revolutionary, and so forth. And she gets more play. I mean, even Dr. Ben, in this book here, African Modern Western Civilization, he's pointing out that Amenhotep IV looked, quote unquote, emaciated, elongated, sick. That the woman that he married he may not have been the father of the 6 children she had. 6 girls. Well, if that is so, she was a beautiful hypocrite because she is seen in the images praising the divinity beside her husband. So if she was stepping out on him, then, but you see, it's a part of the distortion and the misrepresentation that the European Americans and the Europeans have presented to us to steal Egypt and the benefit or the heritage of African people. So Abu Simbel had 4 gods, Ra-Harati, Amun-Ra, Ptah, and Ramses himself. So therefore, Kamamo was a late temple built during the Greco-Roman period. It was a Greek temple, a Roman temple, but it was built under Greek and Roman overlordship by Egyptian architects and so forth. There were two, it was a double temple of two principles. The elder Horus, remember I told you that there is a difference between, there were two Horuses. There was Horus of the sky and Horus the son of Osiris and Isis. So the elder Horus is supposed to have been Osiris's brother. I don't know why he got the throne, why Osiris got the throne ahead of him. But two principles. So the elder Horus and Sobek, the crocodile god at Abu Simbel. Philae was okay. The story says that Set, the brother of Osiris, he was jealous and he killed his brother and he cut his body into 13 pieces. He threw the 13 pieces in the Nile River and it was never recovered. But when his grieving widow went searching for her husband, she found each one of those and she buried it where she found it. And that's why you see so many people claim that Osiris is buried in my town. The heart of Osiris, the head of Osiris is buried at Abydos, where Seti built his temple. But the heart of Osiris was buried at Aswan, at Philae Temple, which is the temple of Isis. So the temple of Isis had several gods. We see first of all, in the what is called the dromos, so the walkway into the temple, we see there's a set of three god divinities that are worshipped to the right. Arsenupus, which is a Nubian god, Imhotep, and Arsenupus, Arsenupus, Mendelisi. Mendelisi was the Nubian divinity. Imhotep is the builder of the step pyramid in the first period, the first monumental stone structure that is at Saqqara. It's interesting because for all those years it remained closed. When I was there in 2022, it had been open, and I actually went into the step pyramid. Okay, and it's beautiful in there. But Imhotep, who built that for Pharaoh Zoser, is worshipped at Isis temple. So Isis, Imhotep, Arsenupus, Mendelisi, and Khnum is seen. Khnum was worshipped at Elephantine. He didn't have a wife. He didn't have a wife per se. He had two mistresses, Anet and Sute. He was worshipped at Elephantine Island. He was the god who made. Okay, so we got creator gods. So Ra was a creator god, Ptah was a creator god, Ra at Heliopolis, Ptah at Memphis, Thoth at Hermopolis, Amun at Karnak, and Khnum at Elephantine Island. But he also had another temple at Esna. So at Isis's temple, not at his own temple, on Elephantine Island, Khnum is seen making man on his father's wheel. At Esna, the only place where you see the baby in the mother's womb on the western wall. Okay, but he has two temples, and he was worshipped. He was really worshipped there. He's seen functioning. He generally functions for Amun. So then we have, of course, the museum in the Medinet Habu, where Ramses II and Ramses III were worshipped, as well as Amun and so forth. So the temple, Lanibel in a work entitled "The New Kingdom: Divine Temples" in Brian Schaeffer's Temples of Ancient Egypt, explains the concept of the gods waiting. Let me explain why what this is important. Okay, at Medinet Habu, the mortuary temple of Ramses III is the large temple. It was a 20th dynasty temple, but just preceding that, in the preceding open area, was an 18th dynasty temple where 9 gods were buried because they died. Well, how can tell gods die? Well, the gods in most cases have human attributes, right? So, the Median Hall was designed to serve as the mortuary temple of Ramses III, 20th dynasty. Hatshepsut and Thutmose III of the 18th dynasty built a smaller temple in the forecourt of the temple where a number of creator gods were buried. So the creator gods were died and they were buried there. You may ask, how can gods be buried? Like humans, their energy becomes spent in the never-ending work to aid humans. Remember, Ra got sick when Isis wanted to know what was Ra's secret name. Because if you know a person's name, you can control them. Or you can give them a name and control them. And we have that in sports over here. I'm not getting into that. But Lanningdale in his book, in his work called The New Kingdom, Divine Temples, he says, the cosmic significance of the Opeth festival was tremendous. And this is important. Beyond its role in the cultus of the king, it secured the regeneration of the creator, Amun of Luxor. There's Amun of Karnak and Amun of Luxor. The rebirth of Amun Ra of Karnak and the recreation of the cosmos. Gods became weary by the end of the agricultural cycle having run its course. They and their creation needed a recharge, a fresh input of energy. The dying gods needed to step outside of the creator world to tap the pure, uncontrolled power of the boundless chaos surrounding the cosmos. The seething miasma whence the cosmos had originated. Opening the doors to the uncreated was no simple operation. No simple operation, and was fraught with danger. However, improperly done, it could unleash the full destructive potential of disorder. But properly done, through the prescribed rituals of the Opeth festival, presided over by the divine king, the opening could produce rebirth and regeneration. We mentioned this when I spoke about Luxor Temple previously. Okay? But consider this. The festival is called the Opeth Festival. I don't remember if I mentioned this. I did say that that in this report there's more than in the book itself. Amenhotep, the person for whom the Opeth Festival, which is the most significant festival in all of Egypt, it was named after him. He was a creator. This is the guy that had power to create the whole heavens. Right? He was a black god. He had the power to create the cosmos. Who could ever comprehend the significance of such power in the hands of a black man? Like I said, it's like Obama. Don't underestimate that guy. Obama held that power in the American system. I sketched that. He's the one who truly represented us. Don't let him tell you otherwise. When we look at the bones of Samuel Carson, the Ghana, and I told you about Jerry Rollins, they keep you on a need-to-know basis. You don't need to know this, so they don't tell you. So let me concede that the ancient Egyptians were Caucasians, right? Which is not. They weren't. But they were worshipping black gods. Imagine white folks saying that we were Egyptians, but we painted our gods black. There's a contradiction inherent in there. Modern scholarships knows this, but they tell you otherwise. They know the New Kingdom is the best documented period. They know Amenhotep, Amun-Ra, Min, Ptah. Ptah was our church told us that Ptah was really the first god, that he was a pygmy. Dr. Bell said that it all started in Central Africa, where the Twa people originated. But they say, some guy went over there, probably an Englishman, he said, look at those little people, they look like pigs. And we started calling them pygmies. But those are the first spirits. Those are the people who created the notion of what Ra represented at the end of the night. So, he said that this kind of worship went on for 300,000 years. Not an easy thing. Amun is shown as black with Hatshepsut besides the sanctuary at Karnak Temple. There is an image of him in Luxor Temple, Luxor Museum. You go into Luxor Museum, you can take pictures in the Cairo Museum, but you can't take pictures in the Luxor Museum. The Luxor Museum has some of the best pieces discovered in Luxor, Egypt, and housed in the museum. But I had this, my guy talked this lady into letting me take one picture in the museum of Amun, in, as they say, in blackface, in the 18th dynasty, the time of Thutmose III. We see him again in Ramses Abu Simbel Temple. The interesting thing is that the gods of the 18th dynasty are black. The gods of the 19th dynasty are black. The gods of the 20th dynasty also black. And this evidence comes from Ramses III's mortuary temple at Medinet Habu. And in the second court we see evidence of, right, the festival of Min. So some of the great festivals supported the black gods, okay? Shwala the Labis, Button and Sarawat Hades, the guy that did the study about Luxor Temple. He is standing in the court admiring the illustrated, colorful illustration of the festival of Min. And he says, and I quote, "Scholars are amazed that a black guy would be standing right here." It was Min, black guy. Unintentionally, he admits that Min was a black guy. Min is the guy with the organ, the creative organ. That then also made a distinction about sex. Sex, for the Egyptian, it was not through the scrotum area, but through the umbilical cord area. So you see the guy standing there with his creative principle, and he's represented there, and Shwala says, modern scholars are amazed that this guy is standing there. That is to say, after they had read the words of the Negro book, I mean, they have tried to destroy a lot of the evidence of Africans being in Egypt specifically. In Luxor Temple, in the court of the Ramesian front that Abu Ramses II added to Amenhotep's magnificent structure. And it is said that there is no building on earth that corresponds to the Temple of Luxor. I'm getting ready later this year to come out with a book on Luxor Temple. One of the things that Dr. Ben always said when we went to Luxor Temple, in the court, he takes us to a western wall over there, where you see there is an image of a procession called the Ascent of the Princes, and going to Luxor Temple with the facade of the temple illustrated, and one of the lead cows in the procession depicts a Nubian lady coming out of the head of one of the cows. Hathor was considered a Nubian, was represented among others as a cow, the cow goddess. If we go back to Nabta, which is in the Western Desert, one of the four, those people considered first scientists. Brophy and Bovar wrote Black Genesis in 2011, and he said that these people were the first scientists, they were the first architects. They were able to move huge stone for construction. They created a calendar. They were agriculturalists. They kept cows. They practiced cow culture. They invented the worship of the mother goddess as a cow. I'm sitting in often now, first thing, I take all my family, one year, and first thing we do, we go see this lady come down the head of the cow. And we standing there, and the guides come in. Nobody goes over there. So you go to the temple so many times, you don't even know that that's there. It's not projected. It is not representative. They don't want you to know that. You don't need to know basic. So, there is so much, that's why you gotta trust the serious, your serious researchers. I mean, I've been going to Egypt with Dr. Ben in the early days with Dr. Lewis, and I still going. I was there last year, I was there in 23. I took my wife and daughters in 24. I already got my ticket to go later on this year, so I'm doing the research. So when I come to you, I'm coming genuinely having learned the information and sharing it with you. I'm not in it to make the dollars. Nobody buying my books. But that's okay. Dr. Ben told me, publish or perish. And I'm publishing. I'm creating. I operate on the principle of Tiger Woods. He said, my score is up there. You got to match that. So all the talk and talk and talk, that's just win. This is what I want to see. Publication. So, okay. It's interesting because here's what I was saying. According to Dr. Lewis, this is the information our children need to know. Right? We must understand much information was destroyed by nature and pernicious humans to hide or omit the truth. The question is, why would European American writers tell you the very foundation of the entire Western civilization infrastructure? This, its architecture, music, philosophy, gods, science, medicine, and much more is African in conception. They're not going to tell you that. You got to find it out yourself. Always about the books support me so I can continue my work. Edfu and Denver had one divinity. Hathor and Denver, Horus and Edfu, they were married, they lived separately, and they would go and visit. We have what is called the Feast of the Ships, where they go, he would go to her temple, she would come to his temple, and so forth. Given such, the gods were essentially worshipped in their sanctuary. Now, from a distance, the temple was the sanctuary. Once within the enclosed area of the temple, the sanctuary was a separate enclosed area. Within that enclosed area was the sanctuary, was the nails. The nails are like a room in the sanctuary, where the symbol of veneration was honored, was housed behind a small door or a blind. Sufficient space in the room enabled the priest to walk around the nails to do the ritual. Nevertheless, the sanctuary was either a room or a compartment within the covered temple. Covered temple means that the temple, the part of the temple that has a roof. Luxor temple, you go in, there's the pile of the great court, you have the procession column, you have the court, you have the hypostyle hall. Into the sanctuary is the covered temple. Karnak is an open enclosure. Some of the other temples are covered. Okay? The former correspondent to Luxor temple was built by Alexander. The sanctuary in Luxor temple was rebuilt by Alexander the Great after the Persians and the Syrians had wrecked the temple, wrecked the sanctuary. And behind the sanctuary, remember I mentioned the last time, is the sanctuary of Amenhotep. So there are two sanctuaries in Luxor temple, and three gods are worshipped there. Amenhotep, Amun-Ra, and the king when he's transformed into a divinity in the annual festival of the Omer. The principal temples visited on the tourist circuit today are essentially new kingdom structures, such as the Karnak, Luxor, Deir el-Bahari, Abydos, Ramuzim, Abu Simbel, and Medinet Habu. The later or Greco-Roman temples are Edfu, Denver, Komombo, Esno, and Philae. These all have a single sanctuary. Luxor has a double sanctuary. what Abu Simbel is considered a rock-cut temple built in the hill, in the stone, in the temple, in the mountain. It is hollowed entirely into the mountain. Deir al-Bahri temple, Queen Hatshepsut, behind the hypostyle hall, the sanctuary is in the mountain itself. The mountain is a backdrop to the hypostyle hall that was covered, but the second court and the first court with the division are just additions to the temple. The New Kingdom temples, with the exception of Abu Simbel, are standalone temples. Hatshepsut's temple, which is the sanctuary is in the mountain, it was groundbreaking in that in her age, in her time, the norm was a one-story building. She built a 3-story building. Dr. Ben always wondered why was her building before many of the Greek buildings not considered a wonder of the ancient world. All right? Perhaps it was because she was a woman, or perhaps these people never ascended that far into up the Nile to discover that there was this wonderful temple. 1,500 years before Christ, 3,500 years later, this temple has still retained its majestic infrastructure, its beauty. You know, it's as Denzel said in the book of Eli, battered, but it will do. Okay, everybody goes there to see that. Okay. I mentioned the Komombo and so forth. Okay. When we think about the location where temples are built, okay, let's go back to Luxor Temple. Okay. John Anthony West, you've heard of him. He quotes Schwager, who said first as follows: there is nothing in our own society that remotely corresponds to the Temple of Luxor. Nothing. I said, I have a forthcoming book on Luxor. Second, he believed the entire temple was planned by Amenhotep III, but he never finished his work. Right? We know that Ramses II, who came 100 years later, added an extension to the temple. Scholars have always wondered whether the Egyptians built according to a set and regular plan. He is saying that Amenhotep planned the entire temple even though it was not completed until 100 years later. While Luxor Temple was built in its initial stages, Ramses II, who came along almost a century later, added the Great Court, a great pylon that placed 2 obelisks, 2 seated and 4 standing statues before the pylon and completed the structure. I think it was last year when I told Dr. Lewis that I had just come back from, he said he wanted to get, that I should give an update of it. Luxor Temple, for years, there's been only 1 standing statue there. 1 obelisk, the other one was given to the French in 1836, and there were 2 seated statues and 4 standing statues in front of the pylon. But in some areas you could see the broken statues lying on the ground. So what they have done since 2019 is to reconstruct those 4 statues, and now the full face of the pylon has been restored, with the exception of the missing obelisk. So instead of 1, there are 4 statues standing in front of her. And when I mentioned where the lady coming out of the cow in the procession, the ascent of the princes are going to the temple, you can see the face of the temple with 2 obelisks, or the photographs, 2 obelisks, 2 seated statues, and 4 standing statues. Okay, I mentioned that Luxor had 2 sanctuaries. This is not altogether correct. There were originally a sanctuary for Amun-Ra when he visited Opet. And in the back of that sanctuary, there was a second sanctuary for Amenhotep, who was the god whose festival was celebrated. Now, in the hypostyle hall, so when you come into Luxor Temple, you have the great court, the pile of the great court, you have the procession column, you have the court of Amenhotep III, and then you have the hypostyle hall, and just behind that, there's another opening. When the Romans conquered, they changed the configuration of that room and created a sanctuary to worship their emperors. So theoretically, Luxor has 3 sanctuaries. It's the only temple with that. So, it's the only temple with 3 sanctuaries. That is Amun-Ra sanctuary, the Amenhotep sanctuary, and the king's sanctuary, the king's chamber, where Amenhotep III was represented as having the Immaculate Conception. What is Immaculate Conception? Is the birth, the impregnation of a female without having sexual intercourse in a human form. We have it when at Abydos, Isis is impregnated by her dead husband who is risen from the dead. We have it with Amenhotep III. We have it with Alexander the Great, who went to the Siwa oasis to meet Amun and claimed that Amun was his father. We have it in the Old Kingdom in the 4th dynasty, where one of the priests of Ra is said to have been visited by a being who told him that his wife would have three children who would be the people who built the Great Pyramids. So this whole notion, and then we have it with Jesus the Christ. So this notion of the virgin birth is not altogether unique to any one individual. So Luxor has three sanctuaries. It has 3 divinities that are worshipped there. The orientation, the temple is, as Alexander Badawi tells us, the temple is usually the castle of the god. But the desert temples and the rock cut temples are also called strongholds. So Abu Simbel temple of Ramses II is a stronghold. But Luxor or Amu or Karnak, those are houses or castles of the god. Right? One of these desert temples, and I've been there a couple of times with my guide. So it's on El Kab mountain in the desert. So when we got there, it's a small temple built by Amenhotep III and his grandson Amenhotep III. They are worshipping there. So when we got there, and the guy, the keeper, opened the door, the guy said, "Wait a minute, let me go in." And he said, "Hotep!" And then when I walked in, there was a kneeling figure right there to the right, facing the door, and we went in and stuff like that. But the desert temple has a strong foundation because desert terrain is strong, right? There are different types of locations where the temples will be built. Hatshepsut's temple is built on a desert foundation because the mountain is there. Karnak is based on a flat land, but Karnak had its own problem because people were living in the temple, okay, and they would relieve themselves, and over a period of years and years and years, the salt from the excretion caused when the waters, before there were any restrictions of having of the water being controlled during the inundation, whenever the water flooded the temple, it would wash the salt of their excretion onto the columns, and in 1897, 3 of the columns fell. When they examined it, they found that that particular temple, the foundation was very poor. Right? There were a lot of holes in the foundation because the people just throwing stuff. When the Ethiopians came in the 25th dynasty, they were the best builders in Egypt. Okay, they built solid foundation because according to the weight that will be that you're going to construct, let's say it's a wall, you have to have a foundation dug sometimes like 10 feet down, and they didn't do that at Karnak. Luxor Temple, even though it was built beside the river, it's not that foundation the geography of that area in the 18th dynasty is not like it is today. The temples at the river almost came to the walls of the temple, right? But still, the foundation of Luxor Temple was so sufficiently strong that it could withstand the pressures of the water when the Nile rose. Okay, so the king would commission a temple, but the king never built a temple. The king would commission a temple to be built either for himself or his god. But the king he turns the work over to an architect. And an architect is not some willy-nilly guy that you pick up and say, and pay him salvation wages. The function of the architect is to produce a work of sufficient exactitude, philosophical, spiritual, metaphysical exactness. Because if you inviting the God to come down from the heaven to live here, you say, well, listen, unless you do that right, I ain't coming. Because my job, when I come down there, your job is to protect me from the malevolent forces that are surrounding the temple. And so the architect had to be prepared mentally, physically, spiritually, cleanliness. He had to be a part of his repertoire. So I needed to say that. You need to know this. Okay, so John Eastman, in his book called Search for God in Ancient Egypt, he provides an explanation of what we're talking about, the fortress. Because the purpose of an enclosure wall is to keep what happens in the temple away from prying eyes and ears outside. That's why you see the enclosure wall will be sometimes 20 feet high, or even so that you can't hear what's going on inside there. That's why he calls it a fortress. He provides an explanation of what is meant by fortress and battlements as structures to protect the divine force within. He writes, let us look at, the later temples of the Greco-Roman temples, Denver, Edfu, Philae, Komombo, Esna. They're not Greek Roman temples. They were temples built at a later period during their occupancy, right? So he says, let us look at the temple of Horus at Edfu. Two elements clearly stand out. The monumental pylon at the opposite end in the innermost part of the temple, which in this case stretches along north-south axis. In that Karnak is east-west, Edfu is north-south. The sanctuary has a freestanding nails within. According to the principles that we shall call center, the nails is surrounded by 5 layers. It has a corridor. If you've been there, I know that close to it. Right? It has an outer corridor, a ring of 13 rooms within, of 3 sides of the corridor. One on this side, one on that side, one behind, and there is the passage into the sanctuary. Another corridor area with connecting doors and stairs leading to the room. An outer corridor and the exterior walls of the temple. So there is so much, he corresponds this to a nuclear reactor where you have to protect the reactor from outside. In this case, you have to protect the guard from inside. Or is it the other? I'll come to it. Okay. To the south, according to the contrasting principle of way, the sanctuary is preceded by a series of, again, 5 rooms and 5 connecting doorways. You have an anteroom extending to the end of the corridor surrounding surrounding the sanctuary. Now, let's say, for example, the Opet Festival. The Opet Festival leaves Karnak Temple and travels either by boat. The king would probably go by boat, sailing upriver, where people walking beside the river, pulling the boat with by rope, and there is a land procession along an avenue of sphinxes that about 3 miles long that ends up at the doorstep of Luxor Temple. Along that way, Hatshepsut built 5 way stations because after a while the priests get tired carrying the bark and the rest. So she built 5, and the last one is 6. The 6th one is within the court of Ramses II. Okay, so the 5 rooms and connecting doorways. 1, an anteroom extending to the ends of the corridor surrounding the sanctuary, called the Hall of the Ename. Besides, the detail dwell in the ring of chapels opening off this corridor were gathered there before the chief god. The offering room, the inner hypostyle hall, the great hypostyle hall, and the hall of appearances. So in that case, Luxor has 3 different types of hypostyle hall. So you got 3 gods, 3 sanctuaries, 3 hypostyle halls. Looking in from the outside, the sequence of rooms presents the appearance of a sequence of nested passageways, each surrounding the ones inside. It seems as though a sort of central perspective has been constructed. From the exterior to the interior, the rooms become even smaller, while the floor becomes higher and the ceiling lowers. Corresponds to the diminution of spaces and increasing darkness. Karnak is a good example. The pylons of Karnak, they go from the 6th pylon to the 5th pylon, to the 4th pylon, to the 3rd pylon, to the 2nd pylon, to the 1st pylon. So what is happening is that the temple has to be viewed from the inside, from the outside in, but it is built from the inside out. Okay? So the light becomes cascading from the outside in. As you go in, it gets darker, and as you go out, it gets lighter. Alright, so the God looks out to admire and bless his creations, and the visitors go in to worship and ritualize the divinity within. The architectural technique of insulating and isolating the Holy of Holies is connected with the notion of screening off. So again, we use Karnak. The 1st pylon is an enormous pylon. The 2nd pylon is smaller. The 3rd pylon, the 4th pylon, the 5th pylon. The 6th pylon is just as much. And there you have right behind that the sanctuary, which is a screening off process. The profane, the evil, the impure were unable to penetrate the 5 layers of protection surrounding the sanctuary. This principle of extraordinary differentiation between interior and exterior is reminiscent of a nuclear reactor, though in the directions reverse. In the latter case, with the nuclear reactor, it is the exterior that is to be protected from the devastating energy collected deep within. Whereas in the case of the temple, it's the cult statue within that must be screened off from contamination. So with the temple, you got to look at with the nuclear reactor, you're looking at. Naming. Dr. Ben has always emphasized George G.M. James's Stone Legacy, where he shows you that what is called Greek philosophy is not Greek. It's Egyptian, African, and Greeks were educated in Egypt, and they stole the conception that is Western, the foundation of Western civilization. But he points that there are 9 parts of the soul, 9 parts of the soul, of which naming, the name is more important. I don't know if you remember, there was a movie called by Clint Eastwood with one of those spaghetti westerns, and they were looking for the gold, and the gold was actually in the burial location of John Doe. So when the guy asked him, where was he? He said, no, John Doe doesn't exist, is an unknown. So if a person doesn't have a name, he doesn't exist. All right, so the name was important. And so every aspect of temple structure had a name. Where it's the temple itself, where the king says, this is why I built this temple. I built this temple for my God. Or I built this temple for myself, or whatever. And each door, each floor, each window, each aspect, every part of the temple has a name. It's like cleanliness is next to godliness is an African concept that had been practiced from eternity. Okay, when the king visited the temple, he have to be baptized before he enters the temple. We're talking about, as an example, let us say the Greco-Roman temple, because even though they're built later, they have a lot of they preserve a lot of the ancient knowledge about temple building and decoration. Okay, so when he visits, and we see this at Dendera, we see this at Komombo, we see this at even Edfu. When he visits, he has to be bathed. He gets a bath at home when he wakes up in the morning. You know, the whole idea of the ritual is of 2 parts. It's mythological and practical. Okay, the belief is that when the sun god rises in the morning, he takes a bath. His bath attendants are Thoth and Horus. They test the waters, make sure that it's not too hot, not too cold. He's given his bath. He's dressed, towel, powdered, put on his jewelry, fed him, and then say, sail across the heavens. Okay, we believe that that's theoretical, but we know what happens down here is practical. So the practical experience is what we project as what he does up here. So when the king wakes in the morning, he does the same thing. You get up, you go to the bathroom, you fix yourself, this and that, you step out. Okay, so yeah, when he arrives at the temple, he has to be baptized again, cleanliness. Okay, so when he is baptized and he enters into the portal of the temple, the priest who with him, and we use the temple of Edfu, Horus and Edfu as an example. The priest goes to each and every room and asperges or incenses, and in a way brings it back to life, because the temple went to sleep the night before, right? And the ritual cannot begin until the temple itself is awake. And then he begins this procession towards the sanctuary. But each one of those rooms where he goes to each door has a name. Okay? So, and he gives you the name of some of these places. Right? He says that the enclosure of the mortuary temple of Thutmose IV. Now, when we talk about how the names go, we have Thutmose's and Amenhotep's of the 18th dynasty. Let me give you this quickly. Okay, so we had second Henry, Kamos, and Amos. Amos married his daughter, his sister, Amos Nefertari, and her son was Amenhotep I. Okay, his son was Thutmose I. Thutmose I was the father of Thutmose II and Thutmose III. Amenhotep II is the son of Thutmose II. Thutmose III son is Amenhotep. His son, Amenhotep II son, is Thutmose IV. Thutmose IV son is Amenhotep III. Amenhotep's son is Amenhotep IV, and so forth. Then we get to King Tut, Horemheb, end of the dynasty, Ramses I, Seti I, Ramses II, Ramses Setnat, then 20th dynasty, Setnat, Ramses III, all the way down to Ramses XI. So, the enclosure of the mortuary temple of Thutmose III at Thebes is the fortress of Menkaperah, and is actually filled with captives from Cairo and Nubia. Rock temples are explicitly said to be hewn out of the cliff. Ramses II, the great specialist in rock temples, says about his small temple for his wife at Abu Simbel. He made it as his monument for the great king's wife, Nefertiti, beloved Amut, a house hewn in the pure mountain of Nubia, a fine, white, and enduring sandstone as an eternal work. His father, Seti I, had described the work of the rock temple at Redice, that there should be made by digging in this mountain, this temple, wherein is Amun. The temple is usually like heaven, beautiful, pure, glorious, and excellent. Its pylons reach heaven, and the flagstaffs, the stars of heaven. They are real cedar, wrought with Asiatic copper, with tips of electrum approaching heaven. Two mighty obelisks of red granite with pyramidions of electrum rise at the double facade of the temple. The obelisk, the watchman, as Tony pointed out, even Dr. Red, when we went to the Million Man March, Dr. Red was one of the speakers. He said, "Turn around and look at that." He said, "You build that." What he was referring to is the concept of the obelisk. The Washington Monument is a structure of stone and steel, whereas the obelisk of Egypt is a pure rock cut out in the quarrying fashion of stone from the mountains. Okay, so you have these, and Hatshepsut like to boast that she put gold on the top of her pyramid, of her obelisk, so that it can shine from and seen from great distances. So, as I said, the temples, like any other creation of the Egyptians, were given names. It is known that canals, wells, barges, spans of horses, woven stuffed pavilions, even stables and magazines were entities that were proper names. The names of the temple could be expressed as the quality of the building of its lord. So it is said of that his temple is shining in truth. That is the temple of Amenhotep III in Solem in Nubia. Now, this temple of Solem in Nubia, it is said that even though Dieter Arnold disputes it, saying that there were what is called processional colonnades in the Old Kingdom, right? But James Henry Breasted said that the whole notion of the processional colonnade, and what is a processional colonnade? What became the elements of basilical architecture in Western Europe. That he first, his architect, Amenhotep son of Apu, first experimented with these enormous columns in the center of the processional way, where the procession would pass on the way to the sanctuary. So we have a processional way at Karnak, we have a processional way at Luxor, we have a processional way at the Ram Museum. And the processional way is flanked by extended flaps of rooms that are not of the same height. Okay, so for example, as an example, let's say that the processional columns, the columns of processional way would be, let's say, 30 feet high, whereas the extension or the flaps of the hall besides it would be no more than 20. So there is a story above the roof. It was called the clear story, C-L-E-A-R or C-L-E-R-E-Y, clear story, that in the migration of the idea of the column and the colonnade that migrated to adorn Western architecture was born in the 18th dynasty. Of course, the colonnade was invented at 2800 at Saqqara. The entranceway into the step pyramid of Saqqara is a colonnade. And it's been shown that this idea of the columns and the colonnade never appeared in Western Europe, Western Asia, before the Greeks of 600, 700 BC. Even 700 is early. When we hear about Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey, it said that he wrote the Odyssey in 1800. It may have been in oral fashion at 1800, and even that is disputed, because at Abu Simbel, the earliest form of the side of the seated statues in the facade of the temple is an inscription of I think the word is Carian, C-A-R-I-N, that is said to be no earlier than, which is the earliest form of Greek writing, no more than 500 BC. Even Dr. Diop said that if Homer in fact visited Egypt, and there is some evidence that he may have, because some of what he talks about in the battles of the Iliad and the Odyssey can be found in the back of the 20th dynasty temple at Medinet Habu. So Homer may have been a plagiarist, okay? So we got to be careful about how the evidence has been presented to you. As someone said, I don't like the idea, but we got to do our own research so that we get the proper information, or we got to trust our researchers who are out there doing the work for us. So the naming of a structure is very significant. The king not only names his structure, but there's a dedicated inscription that tells why he did it, who he did it for, and so forth and so on. Of course, we know that each temple had to have some kind of a foundation ceremony. Gaston Maspero discovered at Hatshepsut's temple evidence of the foundation ceremony when the temple was built. And the foundation ceremony was very significant because at the Ram Museum, besides Ramses II's temple, was the temple of a queen whose temple was raised. Nothing was left above ground, but when they actually dug, they find evidence of what remained of the foundation ceremony. And at Hatshepsut's temple, it's been argued or presented that, first of all, a level plane is created in the sand, clean sand, and an animal is slain and allowed its blood to run through the spot. Lots of different spices and etc. are placed there, and also tools that images of the tools that will be used to construct the temple are placed, and then a ceremony is performed to bless the structure. A cartouche of the builder is placed there so that it will be recognized later, and then the temple would be constructed according to the plans, according to the work of the architect. And we see this again evidence at Luxor. Maspero is the one who cleared Luxor Temple. And if you ever get there, you'll see that the temple was so far covered in debris that the mosque of the Syrian holy man who came to preach Islam in the 6th century, his mosque is built at the same level of the Great Pyramid. So all of that was covered under debris, and it was clear. Listen, we got to give the Europeans some credit for the archaeological excavation of the monuments. But in many respects, in addition to the scientific approach, there were criminal elements that stole things that they were not supposed to. The other day I was talking with my brother, we going back there in May, and we were talking about the temple at Memphis. Okay, Belzoni, the strong man Egyptologist, was trying to steal the statue of Ramses II, which is this enormous monumental thing, and he was dragging it until he got to Memphis, and he said, listen, I can't take it. So what has happened is that today now, they built a structure around it, and it's called the Memphis Museum. But in 1975, Brian Fagan wrote a book called The Rape of the Nile, in which he spoke about how these unscrupulous individuals stole everything. There was this army fellow, he said, if he ain't tied down, I would steal it. I would sell it to the army or whatever. So a lot was misappropriated. Granted, the people who did the clearance of the sites, the various monuments, they were entitled to a share of what they found, but much more was taken. When you think about what's below the museums in Europe, what's above on display in the museums and what's in the basement. In 1902, the British built the Low Dam to generate some kind of hydroelectric potential. By 1960, when the Egyptian society had expanded tremendously and there was need for more energy, they decided to create the high dam that the people that brought that buried through, Brother Abdul, Farouk, Abu Naga, Shawki. Farouk used to call it the Dam because it displayed a lot of Nubians from that area in the Aswan to Abu Simbel area. Right? So when they were digging to create a museum, to create the high dam, UNESCO appeared to nations that had a history of archaeology in Egypt to help in the Nubian rescue. And America sent a team headed by this guy named Keith Sell. Keith Sell wrote When Egypt Ruled the East, and he had a team with him. And they discovered at this place called Cusco. artifacts that were deposited in the basement of the Chicago Museum. You see, the work of people like Dr. Carruthers, an artist out of Chicago, was in opposition to what the University of Chicago stood for. So he put these things inside the basement, and a young researcher, graduate student named Bruce Williams, I call it mining the basement. He went in there, found in the cases. And when we talk about cases now, you know, Lepsius sent 15,000 pieces to Berlin in 1850 to begin the basis of the Berlin collection. Reasoner sent 400 cases to University of California. We don't know what's in Chicago. So he found out evidence of the world published in the New York Times, March 1, 1978, that Ben has it in his book. Evidence of the earliest monarchy found in Nubia and Crystal. But that tells you we don't know what else is in the basement. You know, when I was people say, you always say, well, when you were a temple and all that, they didn't want me there, but the guy told me, he said, look, man, you don't want to teach you. Well, when I was a temple, he said, I told him, I said, listen, I went to this conference, and he said to me, he said, we need to have people attending these conferences so we would know what they're doing. Okay, you can fight. I mean, if I'm fighting with you and I'm over here and you over there, I can't hit you. I got to close him, and so we got to have people in these institutions who are letting us know what is happening, but by the same token, they cannot lose their integrity. Okay, you can't go in there. I was reading this book by this guy Kamati, and he has this soap where these two kids, the white kid is washing the black kid with soap, pearl soap or something like that, and when it comes out of the water, the bathtub, the kid, all the only black part of the kid is the hair. But if you buy the soap and you wash yourself, you recover. So we have to go in there, learn what is happening, but by the same token, maintain our integrity. And don't sell yourself short, because once you do that, like the fish on the hook, you're already caught. You can't, they'll use it against you.
Share.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So the temple, you have to have not only okay, so we're going to build this temple. I'm the king. I'm going to endow this temple to be built. And then once I'm finished, I turn it over to my architect. He's going to build the structure, and then I have to dedicate the structure. I dedicate the structure to my God, whether it's Ra, Osiris, Amun-Ra, or whomever. And there's a dedicated inscription. For example, Thutmose III had an obelisk at Constantinople, that is in Constantinople right now. It's one of those things that they robbed or so. He says that he made it as his monument for his father, Amun-Ra, Lord of Thebes, erecting for him very great obelisk of red granite. The pyramidions, that is the top of it. What is an obelisk? An obelisk is simply a small pyramid on a very tall base. For him, very great obelisk of red granite. The pyramids of electrum, that is to say, the top of the obelisk is decorated with gold or electrum or what have you. Electrum is gold and silver put together, called white gold. That he had maybe given life like Ra forever. The Egyptians always sought, they didn't feel guilty about any kind of behavior. They appealed to their God to give them blessings, give them fertility, give them good fortune, give them long life, The kings wanted to, he built his mortuary temple where he's going to be worshipped as a mansion of 1,000,000 years. He wanted to be remembered for 1,000,000 years. I mean, we know that Darwin said that within the next 1,000,000 years, they will still run. The Africa will wrest control of the world from Europe, and Africa, the center of the world will be in Africa, not New York City or in London and so forth. A unique and most interesting text occurs on the obelisk of Thutmose III, originally at Karnak and now in the Lateran in Europe, in Italy. The original inscription as a single obelisk. Okay, generally 2 obelisks are erected, but this is the only instance in which a single obelisk was erected. Hatshepsut erected 2 obelisks. Her father Thutmose I erected 2 obelisks between the 4th and the 5th pylon in Karnak, and then she erected 2 additional obelisks beside her father between the 5th and the 6th pylon. One of his fell, we don't know anything about it, one of hers fell, and beside the sacred lake, the zenith of her second obelisk lay there. And in 2022, in that area where the sacred scarab used to be, beside the sacred lake, they moved the scarab further west, and in that open area, they erected that broken portion of her obelisk. So what I did now is that I went to the south of that area, and I was able to get that broken obelisk and the 2 standing obelisks in a single photograph. All right. So the obelisk was a monument to the sun god, but there is a sexual aspect of it relating to creation and so forth. So he Thutmose IV, he was the son of Amenhotep II. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? He found this obelisk that his grandfather, Thutmose III, had cut at Aswan, floating down the Nile, but he was never able to erect it. So he was laying there, and he erected it for his grandfather, and he put the inscription saying that this was designed to be a single obelisk, not 2 obelisks. Now, I mentioned that Hatshepsut had 2 obelisks, but in her mortuary temple on the West Bank, there is evidence of 4 obelisks that we don't know where it was erected, where the second pair was erected. Many people believe that, so if you can understand the layout of Karnak Temple, you come all the way into the sanctuary. There is what is called a Middle Kingdom court, and behind the Middle Kingdom court is the Akmenu, which was the festival temple of Thutmose III. Right behind that is where the priests were trained how to do the Amun worship. And behind that temple, so we got a temple and a smaller temple, was where the Ethiopian Taharqa built a small temple of columns. Now, Taharqa was a unique individual of the 25th dynasty, son of Pianki, the conqueror who first I did something on Ethiopians in Egypt prior, but I'm coming out with a new book about the Ethiopians in Egypt. And the Ethiopians in Egypt have left significant evidence of Egyptian culture that's preserved, much more than several other people. For instance, the whole idea of the transformation of the king. Once he's crowned, he has to go to Heliopolis, where Ra was worshipped, to be transformed from a human king to a god king, right? And the only evidence of that process was left by Pianki. Alright,
King of Sudan.
yeah, Ethiopian. And then Taharqa was a significant builder. He built when you go into beyond the pylon at Karnak into the Great Court, he has a kiosk, right? A kiosk that who knows how it was able to withstand invading forces, because invading forces, one of the first things that they do is they attack your God, the sanctuary. And in order to get to the sanctuary God, they have to pass through the kiosk in the Great Court. Petrie says of that particular sanctuary, actually it's Du Bois, W.B. Du Bois, who mentions it, okay? That there's an inscription that tells you that Pianke speaks of his kingdom, and Egypt, all of Egypt was the northern part of his kingdom, which meant who knows how far south the kingdom extended. So Pianke's kingdom may have extended beyond what is today traditional Ethiopia, maybe all the way back to South Africa. Taharqa built this structure, but he also built 4 such structures in Karnak Temple. He built that one in the western end, he built one in the eastern end, he built one on the southern end, where you have, there are 2 axes to Karnak Temple. There is what is called the divine axis, that is the principal axis, which is the path of the sun, east to west. But Hatshepsut opened up what is called the kingly axis, that is so that you can get from Karnak to the temple of Mut, which would be further extended towards the temple of Luxor 3 miles long. So that the Opet festival, which is performed in Luxor, begins in Karnak. So Amud leaves his sanctuary in Karnak, picks up the sanctuary along the king's axis. So the east-west axis is the God axis, the heavenly axis. The north-south axis is the king's axis. So he leaves Karnak, he leaves the sanctuary in Karnak, picks up his son Khonsu's entourage, then moves over to his wife Amud Mut's entourage, and then they all head towards Luxor on this 3-mile journey. And then, of course, the party is divided because the king and part of his entourage sails down the river, actually sails upriver. When they're coming back, it's easy because they're sailing down the river. And then the portion that goes by land goes along the route of what is called today the Sphinx Road. They have renewed, they have cleared the Sphinx Road. Some of the old buildings that were in that area have been, you know, the notion of eminent domain, so they've removed all of those structures and cleared a path so that the Sphinx Road will not be a part of the tourist circuit that, I don't know if they're going to charge you just to drive through, not drive through, but, you know, transit from Luxor back to Karnak. Still a lot of work going on in the dig continues. Let me try to get all of this stuff in. So let me jump ahead to myself. So let's talk about conception, cosmological conception, okay? So the God's plan, the God sat there, had a meeting, and so said, we want to go to earth and do this, that, and that. Create these 5 kingdoms. Remember? Mineral, plant, animal, human, and let's give them an essence, a part of our essence, 5 kingdoms. So they created this whole notion of creation. Creation could have been by different methods, rather than by virtue of, some people say secretion, spittle, but you use water. thought, Ptah did it by speech and thought. He used Horus as to speak the words, and he used thought to think of what he wanted, and he told it to Horus, and Horus spoke it. Thought and Hermopolis, he used voice. Ha 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 ha! And the 8 gods that appeared, with each with its predetermined destination. And then we have canoe making man on his potter's wheel. You might tell that at Philae Temple you see him using 9 water and so forth. So there were essentially again 5 creator gods, right? Ra, Ptah, Thoth, Amun, and Canu. Osiris is not considered a creator god. Osiris, who worship Abydos, is not considered. He's a mummy god. He's a god who rose from the dead, and he's often seen swathed in mummy clothing, right? And he's one of 3 mummy gods, if you will. Ptah is a mummy god, Osiris is a mummy god, and Khonsu, the moon god, is one mummy god. So Osiris is not considered a creator god, though he is regarded as an Egyptian god of the dead. Again, Dr. Carruthers, Jacob Carruthers, Dr. John Clark, Dr. Ben Johanan, they were 3 of our lights who are now in our pantheon. He said that these were not competing entities. They were entities of the same mold, but seen through different lens, different perspective, and they were functioning at different locations in the state. Second, the geographical setting. I mentioned this before. There are riverbank temples are built along the riverbank, or they're built into the mountainside, the rock-cut temples. There's a desert temple. I told you about the guy sitting at the doorway when I went in there. And there was what's called a True Fair way station. In the procession from Karnak to Luxor, along the Avenue of Sphinxes, Hatshepsut built 6 kiosks that the priests could rest on their way across. There are various types of temples. So we have the God temple, the King temple, the processional temple, the rock temple, and the kiosk. Orientation. Temples can face either north, south, east, but never west. There is the river and the land orientation. So temples sometimes are oriented towards some kind of heavenly body. Or sometimes the principal temple. For example, in the Middle and the New Kingdom, Karnak was the principal temple. And many of the temples, wherever they were oriented towards Karnak, because Karnak was the home of Amun-Ra, king of the gods. It's been postulated that for Memphis in the north, there is a construct of orientation from Memphis, Heliopolis, all the way to Karnak. We know that at Thebes and Luxor, across the river, the 11th dynasty temple of Mentuhotep II is oriented towards Karnak across the river. And when you stand on the platform, the upper terrace of Hatshepsut's temple, besides that, you know, there were 3 temples at Deir-el-Bahari. 11th dynasty temple of Mentuhotep II. 500 years later, the temple of Hatshepsut, which is built, patterned after that. And then Thutmose III, he came and built another temple higher up between the 2 of them. You know, you can't go into those 2 temples. But one day I was in there 2015, and all the gods were asleep. In the middle of the day, at about 1 o'clock, and I went inside. It's considered an archaeological site. so you cannot go in there. But I went in there and got I got all the way to the sanctuary area, got photographs of that. And like I got, back in the day, you could go from the Valley of the Kings across the mountain to get the bird's eye view of Hatshepsut's temple. And we were in the Valley of the Kings with Azabel, and he must have been distracted or whatever, and I decided to cross over without telling him. And when I got over the other side, because you have to come back around to visit Queen Hatshepsut, he was
Pissed.
he was teed off. I couldn't understand what. The next year, a bunch of German tourists were entering into the temple, and terrorists came out of that area and started shooting. And I think about 5 or so tourists were killed. So he was fearful, or he probably knew that there was danger there. You tell your son, don't put your hand in the fire, and he puts his hand in the fire till he gets burned. So I was fortunate on 2 occasions to cross over, and I was able to get pictures. Today there's a sign that said no climbing on the mountain. Okay, so that's about that. Okay, the architect. So beyond orientation, ritual, and festival, these are the things that support the longevity of the sacred space. The architect or the builder, they must undergo physical, spiritual, intellectual, and building preparation. While the king may sponsor the building of a particular temple, worship, or mortuary, he never builds the entity but turns the work of construction over to a chosen architect. The architect himself. We know that the profession of architect is a revered, spiritual, artistic, and professional position in ancient Egypt. Given knowledge of the craft was handed down from father to son, the world's first recognized architect, was Imhotep, and he learned that from his father. I can't remember the father's name, but that's written down somewhere. I have to insert it in my, the work that I'm doing. He received his skills from his father. Now, his magnificent step room in Saqqara, built for Pharaoh Zoser of the 3rd dynasty, about 2600 BC, is an eternal construction. The structure's longevity attests to its cosmic, spiritual, metaphysical, mystical, and artistic creativity, manifests as a creative building technology, enshrined in durability, manifesting perfection, attesting to its magnificence. Physical plan of the temple. The basic constituent parts, right? So we have the pylon, we have the court, the hypostyle hall, the adjacent chambers, such as the sacred lake. The water for the god doesn't come from the sacred lake. He has a separate well, because the sacred lake can be polluted. Priests bathe in it, boats sometimes sail on it at festive occasions. So he got a special location where he gets his water from the temple, from a well. You have the priest quarters, you have the treasury, the altars, you have gardens, you have a subsidiary temple, and you have a causeway, that is a walkway into the temple. Unas of the Old Kingdom at Saqqara, his causeway or walkway is still intact. It's not been destroyed. Before the pylon or the principal gate, you may find seated and standing statues, obelisks, and avenue sphinxes, and sometimes an altar. Material. You have wood and stone material. Pardon me. Builders work in stone, in hard stone and soft stone. Imagine the type of tools that they needed to do that. So you have granite or granulonite, limestone, cyan, quartzite, basalt, sandstone, alabaster, and diorite. The tools that they use to build. They have copper and bronze, and stone and wood. Later they use iron, though evidence indicates there were iron chunks found in its wedge in the Great Pyramid at Giza. The tools included wedges and ropes, level square, sledges and scaffolds, pulleys and pounders, the plumb line, picks, axe, saws, awls, oxen to pull weight, mortars and tenor between the rocks, the stone, mortar, different types of mortar, cupid rod, the chisel, the building square, baskets were used to remove debris and chunks of block. When the temples were cleared in the 19th century, they constructed light railway to move heavy amounts of debris. I mean, you needed so many natives carrying baskets of dust and sand on the air to a distant location, so they built it, they brought in light rail and moved lots of this stuff, just like how today trucks carry produce for distant regions. Economic sustainability. While it came here from the temple and created an endowment, it needed financial support to establish sustainability. So to accomplish this, temples originated a multifaceted functionality that utilized such employment as craft, agriculture, administration, trade, land rental. The priests owned a lot of land, so they would rent it out to some people and they paid land rental. Medical practice and educational scientific study and practices, training of government employees, study of the heavens, practice of medicine, and much more. Temples, known as houses of life, functioned as hospitals and also as a health center. For common folk who wanted such services, and a lot of people are illiterate, they need to have letters written. I want to send a message to this young lady in written form, and I didn't know what to say. I go to the temple, I pay him something, and write me up a thing. It's like ghostwriters. You know, a lot of these guys are ghostwriters. I'm not a ghostwriter. I'm not a ghost, but I write. Together with kingly endowments, especially empire. So they did all these things to stay busy and make sure that they don't fall in the cracks. But when the warrior pharaohs went out and conquered, and they brought booty, they gave it to the temples, and the temples was able to do a lot of expansive work and so forth. Decoration. Okay, on the exterior of the temple, you will see the king fighting against the enemies of Egypt. You generally see him grasping a bunch of enemies like that, and he's about to do him a job. On the inside, on the interior, the walls are decorated with panels, arranged side by side, display important episodes of the daily ritual. So you have the pylon, you have the court. In the court you would have statues, you have altar, you have columns, you have colonnade, you have sometimes even a kiosk and a smaller temple. In Karnak's great court, you have the temple of Ramses III, and you have the kiosk of Seti II. So we move into the inner reaches of the temple, and as you enter the great hypostyle hall, it's been removed now, but there were like 7 steps of gradation that brings the visitor onto higher level, where you go from the profane world into the realm of the sacred. The hypostyle hall was generally the location where ceremonies were held. The walls were decorated in panels showing the ritual of the temple, the ritual of the principal deity worship there. And then you have, it's the place where coronation of the king occurred. It is a place where the procession, well, for in-house activities, the procession gathered in the hypostyle hall, and then they would do what they have to do if they have to go to the sanctuary or whatever. Or if they're going on a distant journey to another temple for another function. For example, the Obed function, the function of the Obed festival, the festival of men, across the river, the festival of the valley. the 10-day festival, all of these different places, the procession gathers in the hypostyle hall, and then they go out. And once outside of the walls of the temple, the people would now see, because they don't know what's happening inside. The average person has no idea of the activities taking place, because the walls are high and this and that. You can't hear nothing, you can't see nothing. But once you see the procession, then you can get a glimpse of the bark of the god being carried. And sometimes they would, the blind that encloses the nails on the bark is removed so that people get a quick glance. I was once in the Tower of London, that's a bit 70s, early 70s, and I went in there, and you gotta pay, of course, but there's a guy standing there. You can't just stand and look at the crown jewels. You know, I mean, you just gotta pass quickly, so the people get a quick glimpse of the deity of the nation or whatever in that procession outside of the temple wall. Columns. Okay, the columns are either found in the hypostyle hall or in the peristyle court. The hypostyle hall has a roof with columns in that enclosed area. In the peristyle court, there's no roof. There are columns either as a colonnade. What is a colonnade? A colonnade is either a single column or a collection of columns in a line, sometimes in two lines or two rows. The traditional number is generally 11. 11 is a number sacred to Hathor. If you look at Hatshepsut's temple, you got 11, 11, 11. At Philae, however, when you're going into once you landed and you're in the dromos, walking up to the temple, the pylon, you have two colonnades. The left side or the western colonnade has 32 columns. The right side has 17. Okay, so there is no set number of columns in a colonnade. However, in the court, you would generally have either on this side, sometimes in the court of Amenhotep III at Luxor, there are three double rows of columns, and to the right of each one there may be a wall, an enclosing wall, and that enclosing wall may have what is called, you call that an ambulatory, and that may be roof. But other than that, the peristyle court only has maybe statues and columns and an altar or two and so forth. I'm getting there. So we get to the sanctuary. Right, you have the open sanctuary or the closed sanctuary. And some sanctuaries have one or two entrances depending on the function that the temple serves. It operates as a school of medicine or science, a school to train bureaucrats and other workers. It's a hub of craftsmen who work in gold, precious stones, silver tools, artists, gardening, schools of art and technology, carpentry, makers of tools of various crafts, dispensary, hospital, and as a landlord. It's a school of art, technology, and education. Columns and colonnades, okay, hypostyle and peristyle. To have one's name written in the colonnade, generally in the peristyle court, to have your name written on top there, on the architrave, in the colonnade, is a respected honor. Even to have a statue placed in the hypostyle hall, some revered individual. So for example, Amenhotep III's architect, Amenhotep, son of Habu, he had a statue in Karnak hypostyle hall. Okay, because he was great. He built it at Solon. He built the colonnade at Karnak. He built Luxor Temple. Luxor Temple and Karnak Temple, they both have processional colonnades. However, at Karnak, it's 2 rows of 6. At Luxor, it's 2 rows of 7. So there's a difference, but same concept. Clear story. So the procession colonnade is higher than the adjoining rooms. Some temples have a flat roof. Others, especially during the New Kingdom, when the hall is enclosed with walls, there is a clear story, often spelled C-L-E-R-E-S-T-O-R-Y, that has a built-in grated window that lets light into the hall. This is a darkened area, right? Because there is supposed to be some kind of metaphysical, mystical environment in there, just preceding the sanctuary, that it is in total darkness almost. Luxor, on the other hand, it had a few openings, of very minuscule openings, where flickers of light would shine down into the center. And so forth. So this brings us to the temple ritual, okay? By now we are familiar with the 2 principal forms of temples. The worship temple and which is the God temple, and the mortuary temple, which is the king's temple, where he was to be worshipped when he died. However, if the king was strong and he ruled and lived long enough, he could be worshipped while still alive as a god. Ramses II ruled for 6 or 7 years, so he was worshipped in Ramusium as a deity. We find the same thing for Thutmose III. He ruled for 54 years. In fact, he didn't really rule for 54. He ruled for 34 years. And he added the 20 or so years that Hatshepsut ruled and kept him from the neck. So he considered that 20 years was his time, even though he was not on the throne. So he just 52. But his temple, besides behind the sanctuary and behind the open 11th Kingdom, 12th Dynasty Hall, Middle Kingdom Court, was the Akhmeni, which is his festival temple, and behind that was where he was worshipped and where priests were taught, instructed in how to do the ritual in that temple. Okay, I mentioned about the desert temple which I visited. The desert was the region of malevolent gods, strange monsters, of blinding, suffocating storms, of parching thirst and heat. These represent the evil spiritual forces of ritual and prayer that were needed to contend with such evil. So generally, all New Kingdom mortuary temples had an adjacent palace in which the king resided when he visited the temple. He didn't have a place where, beside the God temple, he had to go across the river where his hotel was. Medinham is one of the few temples that has a surviving image of the king coming to the temple. Okay, so he comes to the temple and he has to be baptized. Just give me a minute or so, I'll be through with this. I want to give you as much as I can before I leave. So just as we had compared the domestic domicile to the temple, so you arrive at my residence and there's a gate, and there's a distance between the gate and my porch. Okay, and then you enter through my door into my living room, and beyond my living room would be my bedroom, where only my family members, I can entertain you in my living room or dining room or whatever, but you're not permitted to enter into my bedroom area. So it's the same thing with the temple. So you come past the pylon of the gate, into the court, through the Hakistan Hall, and then there is the Holy of Holies to the rear of the Hakistan Hall. So just as we had discussed, theoretical and historical foundations of the temple, the ritual that occurs on the ground is what we presuppose happened up there. What happens up there is theoretical, we think about it, But what happens down here is practical because we experience it and we perform it, and therefore we project that what we do is what they did, and so forth and so on. There's a little caveat. Okay, so the God gets his breakfast in the morning, and he's supposed to run across the heavens. Okay, while he's down here, he's supposed to get 3 meals: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Well, come 12 o'clock, we don't know if he stops in the middle of the day to eat up there. But what we do know is that he's fed down here, and we suppose that in some magical, mystical way, what the food that he gets down here is transposed to what so that he can eat when he's running across the hills. Listen, the minds who conceive of these ideas are powerful. And that is why you're not supposed to, but we know. And our job is to let our people know so that they be strengthened. And Christianity says, in troubling times, you need a strong heart. Otherwise, you're going to be consumed. But we're not going to be consumed. We've been here, and we'll be here. So the sun god is opening and giving his toilet. Thought and horizon his bath attendant, and set his hot water, test to see if the water is too hot. Even the sun, he could complain, damn, this thing is too cold, or it's too hot. They washed and told him.
Can we ask the question?
Yeah, give me a minute. Let me just give you the.
Alright.
Yeah. I wanted to let you know what happens in the sanctuary, and I'm almost there. Okay, go ahead. But I'm ready.
Okay, get your question in.
Yeah, I have a question, and that is there such a thing as a treatise on, let's say, that ancient Nile Valley civilization prior to, let's say, 1000 BC? Is there something that's considered a treatise, the most comprehensive one document? Let's say something that gets, like you said, a lot of things. That's a lot of stuff. So what are some of the best references?
Well, Dr. Bear, African Mother Western Civilization, Black Man of the Nile, African Origins of Major Western Brazil, Abu Simbel to Giza, celebrating Dr. Bear. Let's liberate the temple. I think that this is one of my best pieces. Black history, this is towards celebrating Dr. Bear. Black history extravaganza. You guys run to Amazon and give me some money, man. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of information. You just gotta look.
Okay, let me ask you this. I got a question. Like the one document says coming forth by day from night. When are they dating that? When is that supposed to have originally emerged, approximately?
We do not know when, in fact, it was oral and when it became written. We know that
it's fragments. It's reproduction of fragments. But as a comprehensive document, there's an approximate timeline, right?
We're dealing with. Remember now, we're dealing with events of thousands of years ago. And time and man has a tendency to destroy things unless it's durable. If it was buried in a temple or someplace else, it may have survived below ground. Our church ward tells us that the Africans were performing the ritual 300,000 years.
300.
Right. So we do know that by the time of the New Kingdom, there is a book by William Arnett that speaks to the emergence of writing in southern Upper Egypt. Right.
Did you say 300,000 years?
Yeah. Well, this is not, remember now, this is not written work.
No, Isn't that exaggerated though? That's a little exaggerated, isn't it?
He's an expert. He's
Isn't that a little exaggerated? 300,000 years ago?
brother, I don't think so.
300,000 years ago?
I've done some earlier work here where I've shown
Do
where
you have proof
Just say yes or no.
for 300,000 years ago? 300,000 years ago. 300,000 years ago.
Is it a figure of speech or action?
Alfred Churchward was talking about signs and symbols, right? So that's the early development.
No, science is not 300,000 years old.
No, not signs, signs. Like
Science is not even 300,000 years ago. I mean,
Symbols.
the earliest writing point we see comes from other hominid species, not Homo sapiens. So,
okay.
yeah, that 300,000 is
I-
way off.
You know
Culture
what?
wasn't even established then.
You're not here to
Language
say
wasn't even
right or wrong.
spoken.
Don't worry about it.
We get language, 70,000 years ago.
When I was at Temple, they wouldn't have me. The guy said I know too much more than the professor. I would invite
Yeah,
you.
but that's just, I'm not to be disrespectful,
Excuse-
that's just a
excuse-
little
excuse-
far-fetched.
Excuse
I mean,
me,
you
sir.
can't even prove none of that stuff.
Excuse
I
me.
mean,
Excuse me.
you got anything?
Excuse me,
that-
excuse me,
any
excuse me,
scientific
excuse me,
paper,
sir.
Research anything?
Excuse me.
any Concrete proof?
Excuse me.
300,000
Excuse
years ago?
me. Excuse me. I was listening. This is about Dr. Ben, right? So I was listening to Dr. Ben, and then in question and answer period, a young man got up and started talking about the face of the man on the moon. On the
Oh, we know that.
No, excuse me, I'm speaking.
No,
I'm speaking. I'm speaking.
Yeah, but that's not made by, what we call.
Excuse me, I'm making my point. Okay, so the moderator
Uh,
You
said,
gotta remember, just a little over
It
150,000
wasn't
years ago,
300,000, don't worry
we
about it. Let's
wasn't
go, we
only,
gotta go. We're not gonna have
hominid
you going back and
species
forth
on the
with this
planet.
guy.
So,
I'm inviting you to come and make a presentation.
Okay.
Thank you, have a good day.
Next, anybody on the floor want something to say?
Yeah, I got another question for you. Can you hear me? It's in all those writings, do they ever talk about? Because there's a rumor floating around that there's some decoding type documents in one of the feet of the so-called Sphinx. Like they're saying one of the paws, according to some codes, there's supposed to be something in that foot. Have you ever seen anything about that talk about?
No, I've seen water stains, anti-investors, the Sphinx may be 10,000 years old, that's all I know.
Oh, okay. Because I heard somebody talking about something's in.
Don't be distracted.
There's supposed to be something
Don't be distracted.
Is that one of the teeth?
Don't be distracted, okay? Deal with what you can manage, and then go from there. Dr. Ben told me, look for the earliest material you can find and work from there.
Close it down, we'll be back with another lecture.
Okay. So I
Hey,
want
thanks
to
a lot.
thank you for your time.
Yeah, he's a good job.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, give Dr. Fred Monderson a great big hand. He will be back to do another lecture pertaining to Dr. Ben. I suggest you come down in your car and drive down and come down here live. So when Munderson or the speaker comes down early, you could have your debate and bring up some stuff with him. So we want to thank Dr. Munderson and honor Dr. Ben. Give him a great big hand.
Of course, you can support my books. I need money.
All right, Doc. I'm gonna shut it
Yeah.
down.
Okay, thank you very much.